Cork, last year 95 children were admitted to adult psychiatric units due to a lack of suitable emergency placements for children at risk of suicide or self-harm. Now, in a moment, we'll be speaking to Senator Joan Freeman, who's the founder of Pieta House, which helps those with mental health problems, about her plans for legislation to force change on this issue. First, though, we can hear from the mother of a 12-year-old boy who's been telling our reporter Justin McCarthy about her difficulties in accessing appropriate care for her son, who suffers from mental health difficulties and who has suicidal tendencies.
My son is 12 and he's been having some mental health issues. He's been very stressed and he's been trying to self-harm himself. He's been talking about suicidal thoughts and attempts, and it's been a very stressful time for him. This has been going on the last 3 years, but in the last 2-3 months it's gotten a lot worse.
And in the last couple of months you've sought out help for him?
Yes. I've had to take him to A&E twice in the last 6 weeks. The first time, my son was really stressed and he was really trying to harm himself. So we took him to our GP, who sent us to A&E. We were left sitting for 4 hours in the hospital, in the waiting room, around plenty of adults, and my son was very stressed. It wasn't the right environment for him. Then after 4 hours and no intervention, we were told we had to go to another hospital, which was an hour and a half away, because they had no child psychiatrist available in the hospital. So we went to the next hospital. They were lovely and they did talk to us and our son and got him to calm down. But then the psychiatrist told us he couldn't treat us on because we were out of the catchment area. So we were sent home. But he said that he would ring the child psychiatrist in our own area and get them to contact us. Unfortunately, they didn't contact us as quick as we would have liked. We had to wait a week and a half. So I got a local politician to help get that appointment sooner for us. Then when we did get into the psychiatrist, he was very nice. He was very good. He did try to help us, but I just feel we don't get enough intervention. Sometimes the children have to wait too long between appointments.
How long are you waiting between appointments yourself?
Sometimes I could be waiting up to 2 weeks, and there could be an episode in between. There was 1 week I was extremely stressed. He was really bad. He was doing a lot of self-harming, and we had to just try stop it as much as possible. And I must have been ringing 3 times a day asking for help.
And what is life like at home now for you, dealing with your son on a day-to-day basis?
It's become very hard. I had to come out of work because I just couldn't juggle work and all of this. We were staying awake with him because he couldn't sleep at night. Myself and my partner were taking turns staying awake all night with him. At night it seems to be worse. So then he got medication to help him sleep. So now what we do is we have put him into our room. We put an extra bed into our room, and we lock him into our room with us at night. We're doing that for safety for him, in case he does wake and he does try to do something. We've had to lock everything sharp away. We were told he has to be under 24/7 watch, and we literally have to watch him 24/7 at home. The younger brother sometimes is frightened, and some days you have good days, but you have a lot of bad days. It's very hard. It's very hard.
What kind of help would you like him to get?
I would like him to get proper therapy, maybe weekly or even twice a week. I would also like if there was somewhere we could go if it was after 6 and there was an episode, because there is nowhere to go. A&E is your answer, but that doesn't always work. I really feel they need somewhere that's safe for children that they can go, but they need something for after 6 in the evening too, because there's nothing in place for that.
And that was the mother of a 12-year-old boy who spoke to our reporter Justin McCarthy last night. If you were affected by any of the issues raised there, you can call Pieta House on 1800 24/7 24/7, the Samaritans on 116 123, or Aware on 1800 80 48 48, and we'll tweet all of those numbers from the Morning Ireland account. Senator Joan Freeman, the founder of Pieta House, is here. I was going to say, can you give us an idea of the scale of the problem? But I suppose that's something that lady has already done for us. It's just a terrible story, isn't it?
It's just a shocking but a very typical story from mothers across the country. And in fact, I was going to ask Rachel that maybe to put out a call to all the parents who face these difficulties, face these terrible, terrible issues, to contact me, to tell me their story, so that we can actually be the voice for all these parents and for these children.
Let's talk about the problem you want to address specifically in this legislation you're putting forward, and that's the treatment of children with mental health problems in adult psychiatric wards or adult psychiatric units. How big a problem is that?
It's not just about children being placed into adult psychiatric units, which is an enormous problem. I mean, we're going against all laws about this. I mean, for example, we're breaching international regulations. Even the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child expressed concern about the practice. The Inspector of Mental Health Services described the practice as inexcusable, counter-therapeutic and almost custodial.
And has been doing so for many, many years. This is not a problem that has arisen recently. We've been talking about this for at least the past decade.
Absolutely. But when you think about when the Mental Health Act was created in 2001, it did not make any provision or standalone provision for children. So that was the first problem. But the second problem, if you think back 15 years ago, the issues that children had to deal with are very different to the issues that children have to deal with now, with cyberbullying, pornography, addicted to gambling, etc., online. So if this continues, if our lack of service continues, the consequences down the road will be insurmountable. With ever decreasing, access to services, ever increasing need for services, will end up with more damaged children.
So childhood is becoming more complex, as we all know. What's the response? Because you're suggesting that it should be illegal for children to be treated in an adult psychiatric unit. But isn't there a danger that if that happens, they won't get any treatment at all?
Well, first of all, by making it illegal, it is forcing the HSE to come up with alternative services. That's the first thing. It'll be at least a year before this can take place. But there are almost immediate solutions that we can look at. One is, there was a document created there about 6 years ago about looking at the collaboration between the private sector, which would be, private hospitals, and the public sector, which of course is the HSE. And that collaboration could actually almost immediately decrease the admittance of children into adult psychiatric wards. It would also decrease the 2,300 children who are on the waiting list. And all this needs is a dialogue with intent. And if we can do that, I mean, you're going to have the Minister for Mental Health on later. Mm-hmm. There are two things that should be said to the Minister. One is the 35 million that was promised every single year for Vision for Change, we don't see it. We were told recently about the 35 million which is promised for in this year's budget. But that 35 million is now going to be spread over 2 years. So there's only going to be 15 million spent in 2017. If you think about Pieta House, you mentioned Pieta House, it's 7 million to run create a house across the country. How in God's name do they think 15 million is going to help provide new services, never mind look after the original ones?
Just going back to one of the proposals you made there, and that's the question of whether the private sector can be brought in here. Are you suggesting that the doctors are there, that the facilities are there in private hospitals, and that the Public Health Service should be making use of those?
And they do. The HSE does make use at an ad hoc type of approach. I mean, for example, there's one private institution which had less than half a dozen referrals last year, and yet there were 8 children who were sent over to England at a cost of 3 million to our country. And those children deserve every penny that's spent on them. But if that 3 million was spent here in this country to look after our children, why should we send our children over to another country when we should be looking after them ourselves?
Isn't there a danger, though, that if that happens, well, then the public service never improves, because you always have this fallback position, and the things that should be done in the public service, and which, as you say, we've been talking about for years, that those changes don't happen?
And that's spot on, Rachel. And the thing is, what we've got to also be very clear about, the government is very, very good at creating new task forces, at creating new documents or new strategies, and they all gather dust. What we need to do now is do something practical which can happen overnight. The legislation will take a year, but the conversation, the intensive conversation between the private and the public sector will absolutely resolve so many problems. And I'm begging the Minister for Health, for Mental Health, Helen McEntee, to please draw up a service level agreement between the two sectors, and we can help our children now.
What sort of contact have you had with the Minister?
The Minister has been very approachable, in fairness.
But has anything changed?
Not yet, but don't hold me back. We're going to. I'm definitely going to have this ongoing, relentless approach to this issue. I am not going to let this go. And if I become boring, I don't care. Every week I'm going to bring up the same topic in the chamber, and every week I will expect an answer until eventually I get one.
Senator Joan Freeman, thanks indeed for joining us on the programme.